to meet Bryan Robinson, who is on my right. He is the academic head and senior lecturer in international business and leadership. Do you hear me well? Yeah. At Schwan, do you pronounce Schwan?
Schwane.
Schwane. At Schwane University in South Africa, that's on the side of Pretoria. And on my right, I also have Professor George Enderle, who is John T. Ryan Jr. Professor Emeritus of International Business Ethics at University of Notre Dame, Indiana in US. And both have edited a 3-volume work, which is accessible and for free on our website in English. So the book is not at all a modest piece of composition. It is articulated, in fact, into 38 countries' empirical reports. You have, in a total, 406 pages in the first volume, plus 459 pages in the second, which totals on 865 pages divided by 38 countries, which gives 22 pages report per country. So you have heard. This is a complex project. Content-wise, I can add that, and I have been reminded, that business ethics is a polysemantic term. So it's quite complex. In fact, at least there are 2 main meanings, which are one, that we are talking about business as or business ethics as ethical modalities of an activity of exchange or services, that's business. And we have a second definition, which is that we are focusing on the entity that offers the exchange and the services. So that's also a business, right? And that has also an ethical layer or not. So I will end my introduction by mentioning 5 V's, which are, I think, the 5 preeminent qualities of this work, from my point of view, and that we will discuss, obviously, now in the remaining 20 minutes. So V1, that's for linguistic virtue of the survey as based on a semantic authenticity, I would say, since the language accuracy of the terms in different cultures is highlighted in a very intelligent way. We have a second V, which is V for viability of various country reporting. I think you both authors acknowledge well the existential finitude of reaching to a holistic work where you would reach an understanding or point an understanding which would have a one fit for all, result. This is not at all the case, and so you have very well also pointed out these limits of the exercise. V3 would be a vision as a theory and practice nexus. So it's about assessing the literature on one side, and you will benefit of very interesting bibliographies, and also assessing the impact on the governance in each country. And so I think you might have, countries where you find few literature. For instance, you find few literature in Czechoslovakia, I discovered, quite interesting. In Hungary, you have a lot of literature, but the governance side is kind of shaky, if I understand well. We have V4, which is value, of course, value in specific areas of business ethics. Of course, you all, or most of you know that responsible leadership and deontology, CSR, macroeconomic level, these are all, particular part of business ethics that have a different value. And the last V would be for volume. I think you analyze as this is a survey, so it's a quantitative work. You are in fact building data on collecting empirical data via a questionnaire, and then you draw a logical modality out of all this data, which should work as a rational to understand the collected data. And I think one of the great virtue of this work is having this volume understanding, I think, quite well. So I give now, without further comments, the voice to Bryan to say a couple of words. Sorry, to George to say a couple of words, and then without transition to Bryan. Thank you, George.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ignace, for your very kind introduction, and good afternoon to everybody. We are very happy to be here with at the Global Ethics Forum here in Geneva. For me, I could travel by train from the other corner of Switzerland, from St. Gall to Geneva. And I would like to give you an idea about this global survey of business ethics in a few minutes. It was launched 2 years ago at the World Congress of Business Economics and Ethics in Bilbao, Spain. And we did that because 12 years before, Globethics actually published the first global survey of business ethics in one volume with Christoph Stückelberger, you know, of course, and Dion Rousseau from South Africa. And we were asked to do the same thing so we can compare what happened in 12 years ago compared to today. The purpose of this survey is to take stock of the present field of business and economic ethics. We call this not the discipline, but the field of business and economic ethics, and to explore the major ethical issues in the field over the next 5 years. Not only to look back or what is going on today, but for the next few years. And so that follows the Global Survey of Business Ethics, which was published 12 years ago. We define business ethics in a, well, over years we have kept that definition in the sense, in a comprehensive sense, that includes issues at the individual, organizational, and systemic level of decision-making in business and economic life. It's not only about entrepreneurs, but it's about company, it's about the economic system, it's about individual ethical behavior in your family, etc. And so the global survey consists of 2 parts. First, we wanted to design the horizon of business ethics around the world. And so we had a consultation over 10 months to find what are important themes. And I give you some themes which we then applied for the questionnaire. It's about business and human rights. It's about business and sustainability, about business and just energy transition, about business and wealth creation in a comprehensive sense, corporate governance, digital transformation, corruption, whistleblowing, conflict and terrorism, religion and spirituality, diversity, leadership and management ethics. So these are many things. And in the second part, we ask for country and region reports around the world in 3 areas, namely training, what is happening in corporations. Second, what is happening in teaching at universities and business schools. And third, what is the research going on in business and economic ethics around the world in those countries. And so it was up to the reporters of those reports to decide, given the limitations they had not 2 years or 3 years with people, 20 people to do that, but they had to make choices and say, we concentrate on training what is happening in companies. That's, for instance, the report on Russia, or what is happening in terms of teaching, the report from Prague, etc. Methodology, well, we used quantitative analysis and the qualitative study. That means interviews with people who are familiar with business and economics ethics in those countries. Literature review, personal interviews, desktop search, database, these are important things. Now, what kind of questions do we ask? Well, first, we wanted to have some background information about the country. How does it look in Estonia or in mainland China, etc.? then what are the terms and languages you use to express ethics or right and wrong in your own language? What activities are undertaken? How do you prioritize business ethics issues? And what are the challenges for the next 5 years? That was in interviews and in quantitative analysis. Well, what countries participated in this global survey? It was 40 countries around the world. From Africa, it was Angola, Burundi, Kenya, Mozambique, Namibia, Nigeria, Rwanda, South Africa, and Uganda. Not really from Francophone Africa, but many from Eastern and Southern Africa. In Asia, mainland China, Hong Kong, Macau, Japan, Philippines, Indonesia, India, then also Australia, and many from Europe, the Czech Republic, Denmark, Estonia, France, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Hungary, Ireland, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, Romania, Slovakia, Spain, and Ukraine. And in Latin America, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Brazil, Mexico, and in the North, South America, the United States. So you see, it's quite a rich range of countries, and we found out that 7 of the most populous countries in the world are also in our survey, like India and China and Indonesia and Mexico, etc. Well, now what do we do with these results? We first are so happy that Globethics was so wonderful with Ignace and Jakob to publish 3 volumes of the reports. And they are open access, free access, and so that is wonderful. And we also presented the reports, and reporters came to conferences in Athens and in Chicago and in, well, here to report about their countries. They will be also published in journals, and we hope that maybe next year we can gather reporters from many countries and to ask them, what can you learn from each other now? You wrote what is happening in your country, but we can learn from each other. And so that is a little bit our perspective for the future. But again, it was a fascinating process of 2.5 years. Bryan and I were in contact almost every day by Zoom or by Teams, not Zoom, or by email, of course. And so we thank you very much for your attention. And Bryan will tell you about some results of the reports.
Great. Thank you very much, George. And just to echo what George said, is just to say thank you very much to Globethics and Ignace for partnering with us and putting this together. And it's wonderful to have it open access and to have the reach that I believe it will have through Globethics. And just a quick thank you to George. It's been wonderful working with you over the past 3 years. What I'm going to do is, I mean, there's just so much data that we've collected. So I'm going to just give a bit of a high-level analysis of some of the findings from Africa, and then just do a quick contrast to some of the findings from Switzerland, Germany, and Austria. It's quite interesting to see the contrast. So in Africa, we had 9 countries participate, and it was very clear that each country has a different context and a different focus in terms of their prioritization of business ethics, their teaching of business ethics, what the issues were for the next 5 years. And you know, just to share 1 or 2 of those with you, and maybe some of my own perspective on what this actually reflects. So firstly, if we look at the different countries, Angola, for example, had a very strong focus on corporate governance and corruption. And if you look at what happened in Angola, I don't know if you know this, but the richest woman from Africa was actually from Angola, Isabel dos Santos, who was the daughter of the past president of the country. So she's now currently, under the police want her from Portugal and from Angola and internationally. But so there was this need to bring in governance to be able to control the scourge of corruption in the country. Burundi, the second poorest country in the world after South Sudan. The priorities there were around wealth creation and corruption. We look at countries like Nigeria, a strong focus on human rights, and the same goes for South Africa and Rwanda. And we all know the history of Rwanda with the genocide. So there's a strong understanding of the need for human rights and protection of human rights. South Africa, with its apartheid history, my home. It's important to have those human rights entrenched in our teaching as well. Corruption again features very strongly in Rwanda, but from maybe a different perspective, because the country's been very successful in addressing corruption from the president down. There's been this commitment to eradicating corruption in the country. So that's filtered into policy and filtered into the academic sphere. Mozambique, again, wealth creation was an important aspect. What was interesting around Mozambique and some of the other African countries is there is an issue with conflict and terrorism. So in Mozambique, you've got in the Delgado, Cabo Delgado area, you've got significant terrorism because they've found gas reserves there. So it's just a scramble for resources, unfortunately. And the resource curse has really infiltrated the country, where the wealth from all these wonderful minerals and gas reserves just don't filter down to the people on the street. So you can see with the different countries that there are different focus areas and prioritization of business ethics issues based on the context of those countries. So I'd like to look at four themes that really came through quite strongly in my mind, and I think we've discussed this as well. The first is corruption. So corruption, it's a global phenomena, it's a problem. But in Africa, it really is extensive and a huge problem. Human rights was another interesting area that was prioritized. So most countries had a great focus on human rights. And I think that in Africa, we see a bit of a dichotomy. We see countries like South Africa, who had the most progressive constitution in 94. It was the first constitution that included sexual orientation protection in the constitution. But then we have other countries where there's almost a bit of a regression, where there are draconian rules and laws that are being implemented. Again, a good example is the LGBT plus community laws that are very restrictive. In Ghana, laws are being promulgated. In Uganda, they've been entrenched, and it's a real problem. But the positive aspect is that this is prioritized by our participants. So human rights is being taught, and issues around corruption are being taught about in business schools, in undergraduate and postgraduate environments. So that's very positive. Another issue that received attention was around development issues. So poverty, inequality was a big issue. Wealth creation. This is important within Africa. And then what was quite disappointing is that there was very little priority towards sustainability. The one question that George mentioned was around the just energy transition. It was right at the bottom of the rankings. But you can maybe understand that because of the priorities, the socio-economic priorities of Africa. And I think I'm cognizant of time. So I think just to do a bit of a comparison with Switzerland and Germany and Austria, And it was a significant study that was conducted in these 3 countries. And it was found, I just want to make sure I get the stats there. So just to compare it, so the priorities in these 3 countries, CSR, 85% of respondents said that that was their top ranking, followed by sustainability, totally the opposite from that in Africa. And then it went down to 14 levels. Number 12 was corruption. Number 17 was around global justice, poverty, and 14 around diversity management. So very much the opposite between the global north and the global south. And I think that there are important lessons from that and important policy insights that come from that. Thank you.
So I would like to compare the United States with some reports in Europe. And I look about, well, the role of law and the role of ethics in those 2 countries. And what I want to say is that law and ethics are complementary and necessary for good business conduct. And I will give you some lessons what we can learn from that. I'm by training not a lawyer. But I realize that law is really very important. And I found that in the report of the United States, in the introduction, when they say business ethics in the United States in the 1980s, 90s, had a unique regulative that prompted business ethics in the country, which means a number of important laws were enacted, like the 1977, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which means that companies are not allowed to pay bribes to foreign governments. In 1991, the US Federal Sentencing Guidelines to provide for fair and consistent sentencing, deter criminal conduct, encourage organizations to establish and maintain internal compliance programs. Or then after the Enron scandal in 2002, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, the legal protection for corporate whistleblowing, as well as opportunities for anonymous reporting of misconduct. And so what was the impact of those legal changes? Well, the Journal of Business Ethics was established in 1982. The Society for Business Ethics was established, the International Society for Business Economics and Ethics, which actually is the main supporter of our global survey, and also the Business Ethics Quarterly. So there was a clear impact on how the legislation shaped the beginning of business ethics in the United States. But on the other hand, we can say that, the law is not enough. And because business conduct can be a merely reaction to scandals or following only the letter, but not the spirit of the law. The law requires only minimal standards, greenwashing, etc. But there were examples like Motorola came out with a textbook with 25 global case studies and commented by business ethicists in the US, which I used also in my course on international business ethics many times. So that gives you an idea how early on some companies were very active in business ethics. And then Richard D. George published Competing with Integrity in International Business, a very important book in 1993. Well, ethics is necessary. And this morning we heard that law is the servant of ethics, which our speaker, Liu Baocheng, told us. And I think that's very important. And I emphasize that often to my colleagues in law. And we can find in the reports of Italy, in Norway, Ukraine, how important the directives of the European Union are for their own countries. So it's not only national legislation, but European legislation. And they say ethics is much more than just, is beyond enlightened self-interest. We had always discussion in capitalism, what is the self-enlightened interest? And often say, well, that's the goal of the companies, and we would argue that's not right. The law is not enough, so ethics, and so we can say, what kind of lessons can we learn comparing those reports from the US with European reports? One is, well, when focusing on ethics, don't ignore that what the law intends to achieve. The law intends to achieve may be certainly in the EU Directive of Corporate Sustainability Reporting of 2014, or the law of the EU requires due diligence in the global supply chain of 600 big corporations worldwide. The second lesson I would say is, when focusing on the laws, don't believe that you and your company are fulfilling completely your ethical responsibilities, and be aware that the law may be lagging behind what the rapid development of digitalization or social conditions and climate change may require. And then when your corporate strategy seems to be profitable for your company and advance your enlightened self-interest, don't believe that it is also justified from the ethical point of view. Enlightened self-interest might be a good motivation, but it's not sufficient from an ethical point of view. And finally, when your corporate strategy seems to fulfill social expectations, in quotations mark, like in the UN guiding principles required, ask yourself critically in what exactly these social expectations consist, and whether you or your company can and should live up to them. These are a few lessons to learn, and I must say, over the process of 2.5 years of our survey investigation, we also learned a lot and discovered and could cooperate with people around the world in a very productive and fair and constructive way. And we can only be very grateful to Globethics that those results are now accessible in those 3 volumes. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have questions, we have maybe 1 minute or.
Yes, I can take in 1 minute 2 questions.
Yes.
Yes, the gentleman just in front of me.
Simple question. How did you choose the countries to study, to examine?
It was very much dependent on whether we could get reporters from those countries. So there was no selection criteria that we would exclude or, a particular country. We wanted as many countries as possible. So we used our networks with ISBE, with EBEN, Ben Africa, SBE, etc. We use those networks as far as possible to get the reporters, but it was a constraint, and it is a limitation, a natural limitation. Thank you.
So just in Russia, there exists a Russian Business Ethics Network, which is particularly for corporations, but not in universities. And so they were willing to cooperate. And in Ukraine also.
Thank you so much. I know.